Exposed and exhausted, things are getting worse on Ukraine's eastern front as Russian troops advance and airstrikes pummel cities, especially Ukraine's second biggest, Kharkiv. Air campaigns are knocking out Ukrainian energy facilities, and Ukraine's top military commander warning the situation in the east has deteriorated significantly. 2 hours north of Kyiv in Chernihiv, the death toll rises again from Russian missiles. Ukraine is calling for more help from the West, more aid from the United States, and better protection. As Russia intensifies its airstrikes campaign, we're asking how to strengthen Ukraine's air defenses. Alexandra Sorg, a fellow at the Center for International Security at the Hertie School in Berlin, and military expert Wolfgang Richter joining us today from Vienna. A very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for taking the time. Yulia, let's begin with you. Your home city is Kharkiv. I understand you even still have family who are living there. Can you tell us a little bit what the situation is like at the moment?
Yeah, I have not only a family, I'm still working at the university, and we are teaching online. My students are also there in Kharkiv. The situation is really critical, but I wouldn't say that Russian military forces move closer to the city in a significant way, but Russia is still attacking Ukrainian cities in the east, not only Kharkiv, but also Chernihiv recently, yesterday, with the missiles and drones, and that is a systematic problem for the city. The other point that now all the significant thermal power plants are destroyed. And as the analytics in energy sector says, it probably couldn't be repair the centralized heating for the winter season forthcoming. Now, most of people have no electricity at all for 20 or 12 hours. It depends on the districts. And normally the electricity is available for consumers at night. So a lot of people, they try not to sleep at all just to make their, daily routine.
So this is having a huge impact on daily life in Kharkiv already with these power outages.
Yeah, but for 1 minute, I have a positive message, not to sound too much pessimistic. Due to Russia attacked already Kharkiv in 2022, in 2023, there are a lot of businesses which are still functioning, a lot of critical infrastructure like hospitals, like other services which are working in kind of a extremal but normal way. So city is still living.
Now, I want to come to Wolfgang to ask a little bit more about the strategic element here. Kharkiv has been under missile and artillery fire for weeks. What do you think does make it such an important target for Russia?
First of all, the Russians want to destroy the energy supply in Ukraine. They do that not just for destroying the civilian needs, the critical infrastructure as such, but they want to have, of course, an interruption of the electricity needed for running railroad, which is very important for the supply. You have to see the long transport lines from western borders of Ukraine to the front lines in the east and in the south. And for that, electricity is, of course, one of the first things that is needed. And second, for the armaments. I mean, Zelensky has proposed and ordered also to increase Ukrainian armament industries again. And they are relying on energy supply. And if that is interrupted, this plan cannot be fulfilled.
And Alex, what kind of impact do you think these attacks have on the civilian population and infrastructure in Kharkiv?
Well, I think the situation is quite dire, and I would also build on what Wolfgang just said, that the problem is, of course, that now that the Ukrainians don't have enough ammunition for their air defense systems, the problem, of course, is that they have to choose what do they want to defend, and if the Russians are hitting the energy infrastructure, the problem is it's sort of a vicious cycle. The energy infrastructure is being destroyed. They can't produce the arms that they need. And with that, of course, they can't push back the Russians. And if the Russians are not pushed back, the attacks will only increase. So this is really the problem here.
So it pushes them into a place where they're having to make very difficult decisions about what to prioritize. Let's come back to this conversation in just a moment. I do want to take a closer look at Kharkiv itself, because we've been speaking about it so much. With a pre-war population of about 1.5 million people, it is the second biggest city in Ukraine after Kiev. And it lies just 40 kilometers south of the Russian border, which makes it particularly vulnerable. It is, in fact, close enough that Russian missiles can reach it in less than a minute.
Katerina Velichuk was resting when an explosion shook her entire apartment block. A Russian-guided bomb exploded in the backyard. I covered my head with my hands and waited for the moment of explosion. I felt the shockwave move down my body, and everything was coming down. One man was killed in the attack, and the residents are in shock. Kharkiv has been under constant fire since mid-March. Ukraine's second-largest city is located only a few kilometers from the Russian border, leaving residents with virtually no warning of attacks. We have a catastrophic shortage of air defense systems, not only in the Kharkiv region, but throughout the whole country, especially in the Kharkiv region. The Russian army has been targeting Kharkiv's vital infrastructure in particular, like power plants. Without energy, water, and food, Putin hopes to demoralize the people of Ukraine and bleed the country dry. How much longer can Ukraine hold on to its cities in the east?
I'll put that question straight to Wolfgang. How long can Ukraine hold on to its cities in the east under circumstances like the ones that we've just seen in Kharkiv?
One should distinguish first between the bombing campaign of the Russians against the energy infrastructure and transport infrastructure and the situation at the front lines. At the front lines, what can be felt now by the Ukrainian military is the superiority of Russians in terms of personnel, but also in terms of ammunition available. So it makes a big difference if the Ukrainians can maybe still shoot 2,000 grenades a day. I speak about artillery, while the Russians can have 7,000 or 10,000 a day. This can be felt now at the front lines, and that is the reason why the Ukrainians have to do both. They have to look for better supply, and this is, of course, the task of the West. And second, they have to look at more personnel at the front lines. They are running short of personnel. That means they have to shorten the front lines, and they cannot fight at a high cost for every village. So probably they have to give up here and there some villages to flatten the front lines and to save personnel. One should not believe again in the rhetoric that there is a possibility to regain full territorial control of the whole of Ukraine. I think this is not realistic anymore.
So Ukraine lacking in multiple areas, and I do want to return to the issue of personnel shortly. But first, Yulia, looking at that report we just saw, it must be difficult to watch having students and family there. As we've seen, Russia carrying out these huge attacks on Russian energy facilities. Can you tell us more about how people are experiencing these in Ukraine and how dangerous of a development it is?
Yeah, really, it was a heartbreaking video for me because it was my neighborhood. Some buildings which are destroyed, they are just residential ones, less than 1 kilometer from my own apartment there. But I wanted to probably a little bit react what Wolfgang said, because, of course, there is no sometimes point to fight for every village, but Kharkiv is second largest city of Ukraine. And now, even despite the war, it is more than 1,300,000 of people there. Moreover, more than 500,000 of people who are internally displaced people are living there, and they displaced within the region. About an hour ago, Kharkiv Mayor Igor Terechov said that they are not going to evacuate anyone from Kharkiv forcibly. And also, I bought tickets for my mom who is visiting her relatives in Kyiv, and they trains are running and there are still seats available to buy. The city tries to live normally, but to be realistic, I have a bad forecast if Russia will continue to terrorize people with these massive attacks. They mostly launch it during the nights and early mornings, and civilians are not ready for this. And actually, I will agree to all other guests about the gap in which Ukraine is now, because we definitely need to renew some manpower on the front line. And from another point of view, people are running out of ammunition. And that is a very bad effect on Ukrainian society, because even those who were thinking to, let's say, join Ukrainian army at this point, they feel themselves less protected than a year before, when it was reported that new, let's say, delivery from Western allies arrived to Ukraine, and there were some successful operation on the front line.
And they're also going into a situation where Alex, we heard the commander-in-chief, these remarkable comments that he's saying that the Eastern Front has significantly deteriorated the situation there. What does that look like in practical terms?
Well, I think the situation is quite dire, but to maybe not depress the viewers too much, let me start with a positive note here. And that is that it's still a very costly war for Russia. Russia is losing in all of these battles, in the battle for Avdiivka and so on. They're losing thousands of soldiers. They're losing armored vehicles. So this is still the case. The problem, of course, is, as Wolfgang has pointed out before, in terms of artillery, Ukraine is outgunned 1-5. It might be 1-10 in the coming weeks. Personnel, at some areas on the front line, it's 1-7, right? So this is really a dire situation. But, and now ending with a positive note as well, we can change this. We have seen time and again, if we arm Ukraine, if we give it the weapons it needs, it can sustain the fight against Russia. And so to put it simply, if Ukraine is losing, we are not doing enough.
Let's pick up on the personnel issue, since it seems to come up repeatedly. Wolfgang, we know that Ukraine has now lowered the minimum age for military conscription from 27 to 25 in order to replenish troops. How helpful do you think these new recruits will be to Ukraine's cause?
Kiev's new law came late, I have to say, after heavy discussion, lengthy discussion in the parliament. Whether it has the effect that was wished for is questionable for the following reasons. Theoretically, it could address 400 to 500,000 people in the age, but these numbers, of course, would be sufficient to compensate for the Ukrainian losses and personnel shortage and relief soldiers at the front lines who are therefore exhausted, of course, after 2 years of war. However, I think these figures are far from reality, and it takes a lot of time to implement that law, because people have, the recruiting system has to be organized, the people have to be found, and then they have to be trained. They should not be sent to the front lines too early. So the families will still wait until the exhausted soldiers would be able to be rotated. There's a lot of reasons which we can discuss, of course, why I feel that these figures are unrealistic. Maybe because a lot of people try to evade. I know that the new law is now increasing the punishment for those who want to evade service, but maybe a lot of people are out of reach, in particular those who are residing in EU countries. So with that caveat, there is still the outcome, which would then, after some months, enable the Ukrainian forces to fill the gaps and to rotate and to relieve soldiers that are exhausted.
And as you hint at, this has been a controversial law. Yulia, can you tell us a little bit what you're hearing from Ukraine about how it has divided society?
Yeah, it's really kind of problematic question because, as to me, as a political scientist, these issues weren't communicated enough from political elites in Ukraine. For example, Mr. Zelensky, president of Ukraine, he didn't even mention this new legislation during his, let's say, everyday video appeal to nations. So he wants to be distance from these processes because he is a politician. And from the other point of view, there are a lack of clarity who will be conscripted, whether people will be trained in a good manner and then, let's say, forwarded on a front line. There are a lot of civilians, especially male civilians, who are afraid to be just put on a front line after, let's say, they just updated their data. And I would say that I can see some positive norms in this legislation because it gets more clarity there. But from another point of view, it's not a rocket science. We can just count that effects of this legislation will be kind of visible closer to autumn or probably winter, because in a month the law will be enforced. Then people have 2 months to register or to update their data. Then it is territory commission who are deciding the capacity of a person, the education level, the other reasons, the health condition of a particular person. And then we also need 2 months due to this new legislation for these people to be trained. So it is not immediate response, of course. And there are a lot of speculation within Ukrainian society. And I would say there are a lot of Russian informational psycho operation within Ukraine, both regarding demobilization law and both regarding the situation in Kharkiv. Yesterday, they tried to widespread the information that there will be evacuation from the city. You must, as a civilian person, leave the city. And the other target they try to reach is the male population, especially young ones. So they use TikTok, they use Instagram for that, which was not so typical for them before. Yeah.
It's worth discussing, though, isn't it, Alex? I mean, for the Ukrainian soldiers who've been on the front line since the start of the war, many of them are exhausted. They want to have an end date in mind of when they can go home and get on with their lives and make plans. When we look at the new recruits that might be called up under this new conscription law, how useful do you think they will be if they perhaps did not join as enthusiastically as at the start of the war?
Well, as I've pointed out before, there is, of course, a personal problem, right? So you have, as I said, at some sections on the front line, 1 to 7. So every recruit is needed, and as pointed out before, these soldiers on the front line, of course, are getting exhausted. So this will help, yes, but and I know it's sometimes more interesting if these discussions are more controversial, but I have to agree here with what Julia said before, and that is that, of course, morale is tanking if you're losing battle after battle, and also because you don't get the arms that you need, right? And on the other side, the Russian side, Russia is recruiting 30,000 soldiers a month, and they are just putting them out of the prison system, basically. Not good for Russian society, of course, but Putin doesn't care about this. So I think it's a complicated situation, but again, also depending on the arms that we deliver to Ukraine.
So let's speak a little bit more about the defense that Ukraine needs. Of course, Kyiv was paying attention when we saw Iran launch a retaliatory attack on Israel. And Ukraine saw an international effort coming together very quickly to down hundreds of drones and missiles and prevent more serious damage from taking place. And it also saw that even without this kind of foreign help, Israel's Iron Dome air defense system in action. So after seeing that response, President Zelensky was very quick to point out that Ukraine should also be afforded that kind of protection.
The whole world sees what real defense is, and that it is possible. And the whole world has seen that Israel is not alone in its defense and is also supported by its allies. And when Ukraine says that its allies should not turn a blind eye to Russian missiles and drones, it means that they must act and act forcefully.
Yulia, does Ukraine see it as hypocritical that the West was so quick to come to Israel's defense while Ukraine remains vulnerable to Russian attacks?
Well, the very rapid reaction among Ukrainian, let's say, opinion makers was kind of disappointment by these double standards, as they called it in social networks, because we were said that NATO cannot interrupt in any conflict outside NATO. But from the other point of view, Israel is also not a NATO member. Of course, there is kind of disappointment, but I would say Ukrainian society is not so easy to manipulate with this information, and there were a lot of voices saying, let's compare our enemies and those who are attacking. Ukrainians pretty clear understanding that we are fighting with kind of one of the largest superpower in the world. And of course, the pre-established attitudes here in Germany, for example, or in the West towards Russia also playing a bad role here. And of course, the third factor is that we having elections, and United States domestic policy is not playing in favor for Ukraine, but still it's a huge task for our cultural expert and official diplomacy not to, let's say, give up and just try to convince our partners that the war is still going on, and it is we are not losing that much as sometimes Russia tried to portray it in the West, and some commitments are still in force, and they are needed to Ukrainian citizens and to Ukraine in general.
To be fulfilled. Wolfgang, what kind of air defense systems would be best suited to the Ukrainian case here? And what is the best case scenario in which we could see those actually delivered?
Yeah, so both cases are, Iran and Ukraine are not comparable, of course. And if people speak about Iron Dome, then Ukraine would need many Iron Domes, because the Iron Dome is a local or at best a sub-regional protection for a relatively small area. Here we have seen an attack from Iran towards Israel with 300 means like drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, etc., over a long range. That means starting in the Gulf, where a lot of American troops are, and the whole thing came after a clear warning by the Iranian side. So this is the biggest difference. Of course, Iran is not, or not yet, as many believe, a nuclear power. And there is Western unity straight from Poland to the US via Germany, France, etc., that NATO states will not become members or parties to the conflict in Ukraine. However, what can be done? Ukraine has a much bigger territory, needs many more air defense systems. And I might say here that the Germans delivered a lot of air defense systems, maybe not enough to cover the whole territory, but much more than many other states. In particular, from the Gepard system to Patriot. Germany just now delivered a third one, or is going to deliver a third Patriot system to Ukraine, Skynex, Iris-T, SLM, etc., etc. So they do a lot, and sometimes at the cost of their own substance. That means of the holdings in the armed forces. So one has to be careful on that. What is being felt now is the gap that the US has left since November last year because of the blockade by, I have to say, a minority of Republicans, but very powerful minority, so that the big package of $61 billion that should be sent to the Ukrainians could not be delivered. This is a gap the Europeans will not be able to compensate so quickly because it takes a long time to change industries, armament industries and ammunition production, etc., from peacetime routine to a war production.
Let's get some final thoughts from Alex in just a few words, picking up on what Wolfgang has said. What is the outlook for Ukraine and support from its Western allies like the U.S.?
Well, I'm very hopeful, although it's not set, that the aid package will be decided on and will pass on Saturday. Then the outlook will be much brighter. And apart from that, I hope that the pledges that have been promised to Ukraine will just be delivered. And if that's the case, we look into a better future.
And if you're watching this, you may already even know whether that has happened or not, depending on what day you are watching. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much to Julia, Alex, and Wolfgang for their time. And thank you for watching. If you liked the show, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.